There's not the entrepreneur. Often it takes a team to make the perfect entrepreneur. Before coming to those 3 power questions, for sure, I would observe that person, look at the person and listen. Big time. If you have the feeling that something is wrong but you don't know what it is, you better look up. And there is something. Your intuition tells you something, so you realize there is something but you still don't know. So you have to search until you have an answer.
Welcome to the Sparkr Podcast, which unveils the mindsets, tactics and opinions of great minds in business, innovation, creativity and leadership. In today's episode, I'll talk to Florian Schweitzer, founder of one of Europe's largest venture capital firms called B2V. In the past, they invested in Facebook or Xing, and today they back exciting companies like Volocopter, SumUp or Outfittery, just to name a few. This episode will be all over the place. We will touch many topics that are really important to entrepreneurs and leaders in general. What started as an episode about the art of asking the right questions turned into a conversation about the importance of listening, being present, the importance of intuition, passion, trust, and relationships. Looking for a theme here, I realized that together with Florian, we discussed why every business is people business. I'm sure you'll benefit in some shape or form from the expertise Florian shared in this conversation. My name is Christian Lundsgaard from Sparkr, and this is the Sparkr Podcast. Okay, Florian, thanks for your time. Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure. And I would say let's jump right in. We have all been in job interviews and we know those situations. And as we all know, some questions come up all the time. There are some classics in these kind of job interviews. Which classics are nonsense in your regard? What questions should people not bother to ask, actually?
Well, first of all, thank you as well for the interview. I really have a good remembrance of our first talk, so I appreciate that somehow you liked it. So what questions people can avoid? I think each question is good. It depends how you phrase it. I think if you ask, tell me about your weaknesses, right away, you probably get some bullshit. If you can wrap it differently and have shown people some of your weaknesses before, you're very likely to get some proper answers. So I think there's no good and bad questions. It's more about being present and getting who is in front of you.
That's a huge topic that I would like to tap into with a couple of questions now in this, let's say, 15 minutes that we have together. As an investor, you get approached by promising people, ideas, business proposals all the time. And how do you assess which ones are worth pursuing? What are some categories that you want to check the box of before you continue?
First of all, as we see more than 3,000 startups per year, we have to filter in a very rough way at the very beginning. So that starts already with formal things, like if we get a mass mail, dear sirs, we know that this mail has gone to probably 100 investors or so. And if it's a good one, someone will do it and he's maybe faster or whatever. So it's not worth looking at. Secondly, a very strong indicator always is, how does that entrepreneur come to you? Through whom? Because usually the kind of people we like are connected to people we like. So that's very subjective. It's not measurable, and it's a very strong indicator, and it takes out 90% of the noise. So after that, if we have a first meeting, the funny thing with entrepreneurs is that there are so many paradoxes. Like, they have to be stubborn, and it's not always nice to work with stubborn people. Yeah. They have to be aggressive, and you don't necessarily want to deal with aggressive people. And so forth, and so forth. The list is really long. So we try to find out if that person or those people in front of you are the good entrepreneurs, or the great entrepreneurs, or the exceptional ones. Probably the best entrepreneur is a trio of 3 people, each of them being a part of the perfect entrepreneur. If you look to the Partners Group founders, for example, I think those 3 are the perfect entrepreneur.
What do they combine? Obviously, it's very hard for one person to get all the capabilities together that you need. What are the 3 pillars or a successful triangle as you describe it?
Well, I think there is always one person which is outgoing and super optimistic and convincing. The glass of that person is more than half full. And then you have the opposite, the one making sure that no huge risks are taken, that execution is properly done and done by the second and not by the minute. And the glass of that person usually is less than half full. And then you have some integrators in between. In the case of the Samba brothers, also three of them, they are that combination. And on top of that, they trust each other by blood. They have had their fight as little babies and taken things from each other. So, I mean, they know each other super well.
They know how to read each other, how to approach each other, trust each other. That's very important. And if we would broaden that up on assessing people in general, I mean, investors tell me all the time they don't only invest in a business proposal, but also in the founders, in the people. Now that's a strange scenario, but nevertheless, if you only had 3 questions to ask a person to get a sense of who you're dealing with, what would those 3 questions be? What would be your choice?
Would I have the CV in front of me or not?
Well, yeah, let's say you have basic informations like what they've done before, you have that in front of you. Kind of questions that try to dig deeper, get behind the curtain, because we all know in job interviews or deal-making situations, you try to present yourself in the best light. How do you get behind that with, let's say, 3 power questions?
Well, first, before coming to those 3 power questions, for sure, I would observe that person, look at the person, and listen big time before coming to those power questions. With some, you get it fast, and others, you need hours, or sometimes you never get it. But usually, I would say after 1 to 10 minutes, you have a very precise idea of who is sitting in front of you. And then when you have got some ideas, you try to find the contradictions and split up the zeros and the ones.
Looking for contradictions in the stuff that they say and how they act, how that contradicts, stuff like that.
Exactly, and then very soon you will know if the contradiction tells you that he is more on the 1 or the 0 side.
To solve these contradictions, you evaluate different factors. You have body language, the stuff that people say. How do you weight these factors?
I never have systemized that, but I think it's I will put it the other way around. The difficulty is that especially with tough entrepreneurs who are, as I said, stubborn, arrogant, aggressive, the difficulty is to remain soft and amicable, because those are the guys who are winners and you want to invest in those. Yeah. So you have to put the discussion on a on an abstract level, and try not to be in any kind personal or so. Yeah. All right. It's a bit confused now.
And let's try to get back to those 3 power questions. Are you ready to name your choices of those 3 questions?
Yeah. For sure, I would like to understand what that person in front of me really wants. That's probably the hardest. In my job, I have to find out if they are an entrepreneur or not. And if they are, I have to understand which role does that person play in the organization. And if he is the leader, is his ego cool enough to accept the other 2 guys next to him? And so all my questions will go around that.
Okay, very interesting. So evaluating how big is the ego, and the first one was what do they truly want? And do you have like a tactic to dig deep to find out what people truly want? Because most of the time the first answer won't be like the most truthful or the realest one. Most of the time you have to like ask why 3 times or whatever. Do you have like a tactic that you use to get at the bottom of what people want?
No, I think that I can judge if it's bullshit or not, what they answer. And if I think that it's true, I will evaluate if I'm fine with what I heard or not. And in the case of entrepreneurs, often I sense that they don't believe in their own goal, which they have written on paper. And if that's the case, I ask myself, can we adjust those goals?
And as one of the last questions, because we have to wrap up already, I hope there will be a sequel sometime. Once you have assessed a person and made a decision on investing in a business or not, and in general, you make assessments, you decide on something, but then might come a time where you have to like change your opinion or decision. Let's say in the case of a startup, it sounds very promising in the beginning, then comes the dip where nothing seems to work, and then comes the time to decide, should we keep pursuing which everybody says, yeah, you have to be tough, you have to keep pursuing? Or should it be the time to pivot or stop completely? How do you approach that question of what the right timing is to change decisions or change opinions?
Well, I mean, first of all, if that is the case, it's only myself to blame because I was wrong with my assessment. So I will always endorse and strengthen the entrepreneur. Always, always, always. And if he tells me that he is afraid of what's going to come, or that he feels that he cannot do it, or that we will have to change something, I will listen to that. I will challenge him big time. But my inner self will always tell me, follow him, because he knows it much better than I do. So again, yeah, it's about listening. Huh?
Yes, I would say all the follow-up questions I would have are too large to just answer in a half a minute. So I would say, let's wrap up here and we will find another time, maybe by phone, to continue this conversation.
We will.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Florian.
You're welcome.
Very much appreciate your time. A couple of weeks later, after we had our first encounter, and I'm very happy that you took yourself another time frame to continue that conversation. That is excellent. And what I would like to do is to start where we left last time. Last time we had talked about, or we ended with the question when it's time to reassess business strategy, or reassess if a person is the right fit for, let's say, a CEO position or whatever. How do you go about that reassessing of the situation? That was where we ended our conversation, and basically for you, you said listening to the entrepreneur that comes up with that idea that we need change. Listening is very important, and then your job always is to challenge them in an empowering way, just to really make sure that it is the right direction.
Yeah, because listening is so important, because we spend only very limited amount of time with the founders and with the business, and we are not in the business. We are not in the company. So I have a certain disrespect for any so-called board members who tell the founders what to do out of the board. Yeah? And they love to use the term board, and they feel very proud of sitting in a board. But in fact, they are totally bored. Yeah? And what investors, I think, really have to do is to understand what the founders are at right now. So I give you a concrete example. I had a lunch with a founder during summer, and he told me that he was struggling with someone in the team, and he was not sure if it's a right fit, etc., etc. And at the end, it turns out that they have a problem in their team constellation. And if that is the case, in general, it is worse than it looks on first sight. Yeah, and so what I can do is encourage people to look deeper and find out about the foundation of the problem, and then put things on the table as fast as possible, and help people to find a good solution to either do something else within the company or do something else in another company. And if the second option needs to be accomplished, there are different ways to do it. It's and it is like divorce, like private divorce. If founders split up, and you can read all literature about divorce, and you will have exactly the same situation with founders. And eventually, if the founders are smart and great and brave, and they have some support from the outside, it can be a very smooth process. Like it happens in divorces too, and people like to go out and have a dinner together. And that should be the goal, and not ending up at court for years and being stuck in negative energies for ages.
In the book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, by Mr. Horowitz, there's a lot of space used in that book about exactly that. How do you separate peacefully so that it's a win-win for everybody? And with that relationship aspect, you jump right to one of my main questions I would like to ask you in this part of our conversation, which is relationships in business, be it between co-founders or investor-entrepreneur relationships, or just in general relationships in business, in teams. And one question that came to my mind from what you just told me is, more often than not, the first step is having the courage to start an uncomfortable conversation. And I think as an investor, you are kind of experienced with having that conversation every once in a while. How do you prepare and start such an uncomfortable conversation?
Well, I actually don't know. That's a frank answer. If you have lunch with someone and you hear new things, obviously you are not prepared at all. If you read something in advance of an investor meeting or a board meeting or so, of course, then you have time to make up your mind and you can think about how you're going to phrase the question around the embarrassing topic. I think the more direct you are, and the better it is. The truth is always with you. So, yeah, go with the truth. Find the truth.
So that is the goal, but the tone, is it like? I guess you don't start with "you fucked up," but it's I guess you have another approach, or is it sometimes also necessary to go like all in full conflict mode?
It's I think that's a communication question where receiver and sender have to be in a resonating mood in both ways actually. And if that doesn't resonate, okay, then you have to find different approaches. Yes, I mean there are some entrepreneurs who are especially stubborn. That is true, and some of them, just don't listen. And you come up with an idea which you think is essential as an argument, and they just do not listen to you, and you have to repeat that again and again and again. And I have one case, where now in the meantime, after years of working together, I have understood that if that idea doesn't come from him but from me, I need at least 3 months to get it over. And interestingly, I have succeeded if after those 3 to 9 months, he comes up with exactly that idea and sells it to you as his idea. Yeah, that is fantastic. when you have one, it very often takes that long, and then you're surprised. You say, okay, oh yeah, but it arrived. Okay, fine. And then you obviously have to cut back your ego and say, okay, you have a fantastic idea. I think that's great. That's fantastic. That's the only way to work with those kind of people. And the more stubborn they are, the more successful probably they also are, because those are the guys who can walk through any wall.
Yeah, and is there, you said 3 to 9 months, is there a shortcut of, like in the movie Inception, in planting an idea into someone so that they think that it has been their own idea?
Again, it depends on the type of personality, and the case I'm thinking of right now is a very, very, very extreme case, and there's no gray. It's either 0 or 1, and they touch the genius. So yeah, I'm really humble. I'm listening to those people, and I know that I cannot achieve an inch of what they do kilometer-wise every hour.
Again, that comes back to that you as an investor have you look at yourself as a humble contributor or a humble empowerer of an entrepreneur. It's not, you're not the big guy with the big ideas. No. You empower the entrepreneur.
That's for sure. Because at the end we bring money. That's why they come to us from the very beginning. And I think we do add a lot of value in what we do and how we do it. And yes, there are investors who take value from their interactions with the founders and diminish the value of the company. That's true, but that's only the minor part of the value creation. The 95% comes from the entrepreneur. And full stop.
That leads me to a question where everywhere you always hear that mantra of follow your passion. Just follow your passion. What do you think of that saying in business?
Something you need to have if you want to be someone who creates something outstanding, or if you are part of a team which creates something outstanding. Without that passion or feu sacré, or however you want to call it, it's very likely that only average things will be achieved.
But I guess passion alone is not enough.
If you don't have it, you cannot win. But of course, it comes along with smartness and courage and a lot of willpower to fight hard, and then also at a later stage work on yourself. And try to empower your team much more, and then there are very few entrepreneurs who build companies like Facebook or Microsoft or Apple from the very beginning until one of the largest companies in the world. And those entrepreneurs are so rare. Mark Zuckerberg did not sell his company for $1 billion at the age of 22 or 23 because he wanted to realize his vision. And this, not very often.
People have very different kinds of passions. Passion can lead people to very different on different paths. Do you have visions or passions that you think they are very important that they get realized compared to others where you say, come on.
There's something you can find out easily as an investor, is that person just passionate about money, or is there something else? Is there a higher goal, a higher purpose? And if it's just the money, I think you can forget it. And I think you should forget it, because, why at the end? Financial returns are a prerequisite for a company, of course. That's why investors entrust us with their capital and trust. But there needs to be more, and you need, as an entrepreneur, to solve a real problem on that planet we live on. And this is something fantastic to look at. And if you realize that it is not about doing that, but they, 2 MBAs were sitting on a golf course and thinking about how to make a couple of million. Okay, then good luck. Probably they're going to succeed somehow, but it's something somehow.
That tells me that I could imagine that some people think to be a successful entrepreneur, you need to have exactly that, the MBAs, or have some kind of entrepreneurial background by studying entrepreneurial stuff. But would you say that you actually don't need that, because when you are so willing to achieve something, that you will find your way, that you will be resourceful and find your way?
That will decrease more and more, and most problems will be solved by technology, and not always, no, but in most cases, yeah.
Is there, you mentioned the willpower and the willingness to fight rigorously comes with passion. Is there a moment in time where you have to abandon your passion to protect the business or to protect yourself? Have you seen such instances occurring?
Yes, again and again. And that's really the question about timing. Who is good for which phase of the company? And founders not necessarily are good managers. In the very rare cases they are. And if they think they either grow with it, that's possible, of course, or they are not. And then what do? Either they recognize the situation, take someone in, or they don't, and they basically screw the company.
Is that a realization that comes from the founders themselves, or is that one of those uncomfortable conversations or situations where you have to bring up the truth in quote unquote?
I think this question, unfortunately, is a question you cannot force. If you try to do that, the company takes a hit. I mean, look at what happened to Uber. That's exactly what happened. And I think they destroyed a lot of value within a year. But I admire Benchmark for what they have done, because I'm sure they had a lot of informal discussions. And suddenly they said, okay, this is too much, and now we have to take a stand. And of course they knew that the value would go down for a certain while. But they did that for the sake of the company. And that is really, really, really great.
Here again, we get into the direction of the question of timing, of decisions that are difficult to make. And in our first part of the conversation, you mentioned a lot that you also trust your personal judgment when it's referring to when is the right timing, which founder really has, let's say, the power or the passion. And this personal judgment is something very powerful. And what I would like to try to do is find out if there are things that listeners can learn or can get some inspiration from how you acquired your personal judgment or how you deal with your judgment. So what is it, that personal judgment? Is it a gut feeling, a rational analysis, a combination? How would you describe it?
The very short version to that question, the answer to that question is, the more I practice, the luckier I get. Danny Gutenberg told me that. I think he cited it from Tiger Woods, who cited it from someone else. I think that's very true. To be a little bit more precise, I think if you have learned to know a lot of people, in my case entrepreneurs, you slowly start understanding what kind of entrepreneur he is. There's not the entrepreneur. Often it takes a team to make the perfect entrepreneur.
The three guys, the convincing, optimistic one, the skeptic, and the mediator.
Exact. Okay, we had that last time. Yeah, true. So, who is it, and who is hiding behind which face? Yeah, because often it's the other one. And actually, there are tools which help you assess that. Yeah, we use Thomas International, and that gives you a very, very precise answer, and it reduces your time of learning to know the other one by 6 months.
It's funny that you bring up the quote, the more I train, the better I get, or the luckier I get. Indeed, Daniel Gutenberg likes to say that. In just a podcast that I recorded with him, he brought that up as well. And I like that quote as well. Also because it includes the word training. And how did you train your judgment? You said it's just seeing a lot of entrepreneurs. So basically training by getting exposed, by making experiences, get into the cold water, or how do you train?
Yeah, and being ruthless with yourself, analyzing in hindsight the good ones and the bad ones, and also the misses you had. Yeah, our anti-portfolio is spectacular. Yeah, the companies which pitched to us and which we turned down and became huge successes afterwards. So we have an exercise to go through the entire process again and understand why did we say no at what stage, and I think especially interesting are the failures which we experience ourselves, because we are the closest to the learning, and there are some patterns which we recognize now. And I will pick up one example of patterns. I think there's a pattern that if greed comes into play, reality is going to be distorted. And greed can happen in many ways. Either you just realized a fantastic exit, yeah, or even worse, 2 or 3 in a row, then you slowly begin thinking that you can walk on water. So that's the beginning of the end.
It sounds like success can make you a bit blind. That's what you're basically saying. Greed, yeah, that's true. Are there other learnings that you made from wrong assessments, and how did they change the way you go about assessing opportunities now?
Yeah, I think that's something you mentioned earlier before also. If you have a feeling that something is wrong but you don't know what it is, you better look up, and there is something. Your intuition tells you something, So you realize there is something, but you still don't know. So you have to search until you have an answer. That's something we learned.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit? How does intuition show itself to you when something is not feeling right, or when you are taking a decision? Just can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I think that the question if I trust a person or not is taken very, very fast. So that's the first impression, and I have to validate that, of course. Reading into the past, challenging the present, and questioning the future, and of course taking references. I mean, you always have to call people who have worked for those people or with those people, and ideally they are not the ones giving you the reference, but you just do it. That will give you a very precise picture. And if I know that I do not trust people, I really avoid them. And if I've made experiences, bad experiences, I just don't want to spend time with them anymore.
From what you're saying, an anecdote comes to my mind from, I'm not sure where I have it from, maybe also that book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, about the references. This guy said he made the experience that it is uncomfortable for people to talk badly about another person. So the trick he came up with to assess if a person is a good candidate or not, he talks on their he writes them an email, or he talks on their answer machine on the phone, and says, only call me back when you can recommend that person. And that's a way to give the other person the opportunity to give an honest feedback without feeling too uncomfortable. And that mechanism turned out to be really helpful for that guy.
I'm wondering how practical it is. I'm not so sure. I do it differently. I ask my counterpart to tell me about the weaknesses, because they are. And if he doesn't come up with a weakness, I know that the reference call was for nothing, and I have to do another one.
Getting a first impression of a person, you said that happens really quickly. I remember the first part of our conversation where you said it's like the first 10 minutes. You watch them, you observe them, all kind of indicators, body language, maybe conflicting statements, things like that. Can you name or formulate what happens in those 10 minutes? Or is that just something that you can't put in words?
Yeah, what happens is, first of all, there's a certain triage, and if I don't trust that person or I don't want to engage, I'm going to do a polite meeting and have the time necessary to have a polite discussion, and maybe give some feedback or ideas that can be valuable, and that's it. If I like the person and I trust the person, I want to learn from that person too. And I think you can always learn in a conversation, and want to give as much as possible. And giving means being direct and trying to find the truth. Yeah. So I think you do that if you ask questions a little bit left and right of the path, and you see how the other side reacts. And if you see that it's a little bit weak here, you continue that direction, and you will find the truth, I guess.
I remember in part one you said that for getting a person, it's really important to, as we talked earlier, to observe that person, to listen, and just to be present, actually, to also feel the vibes of that person. How do you do that? Because it is really impressive. You switch between meetings, between different companies. You have to rewire your brain all the time. How do you do it to be present all the time?
On one hand side, it's very easy. On the other hand, it's probably the most difficult thing on earth. First, you have to sleep well. I don't sleep well all night. Sometimes I'm thinking too much. So that's number one. Secondly, I think you have to be extremely disciplined in the sense that you don't do two things in parallel, which you anyway cannot do. But having, your mobile phone or your computer in a meeting, what does that lead you to? Nowhere. Just distraction, and you do nothing 100%. And then comes also to discipline comes preparation. And I think it is very important that if you change the topic of a meeting, you leave the previous meeting and topic in the past. You conclude, and then at least for 10 seconds you prepare yourself for the next thing, and you are here and you are focused. And then I think the last practical thing, you better do a short but 100% meeting instead of 2 hours and working with your laptop or doing funny things with your smartphone.
Yes, I realize that you have always these half an hour slots usually to be super focused and get to the goal quickly. And thank you also for having a cool meeting again here.
Likewise, Christian. Have a good time.
You too.
Bye.
This is it, dear listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Sparkr Podcast. If you like to hear more tactics and learn more about the mindset of interesting people like Florian, you can find many more episodes of this podcast on the Sparkr blog. Just visit www.sparkr.ch/podcast. That's sparkr.ch/podcast. There you'll find conversations about leadership, for example with soccer legend Ottmar Hitzfeld, or about the corporate culture of Facebook, live from their headquarters in Silicon Valley. Or you can get more insights in how a unicorn investor sees the world and into the future. All that said, thank you so much for listening and sharing the insights of great minds in business, innovation, creativity, and leadership with the Sparkr Podcast. Have a great day and see you next time.